The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
America is used to seeing Canada as a quiet neighbor and reliable energy partner. But what happens when the neighbor decides to suddenly turn off the tap and leave you without oil, gas, and electricity? Just one decision by Ottawa, and the U.S. finds itself on the verge of economic chaos and loss of global influence. Want to know why Canada did this and who will now take America's place in global energy? Watch till the end. You will be surprised. Canada, a longtime energy partner of the U.S., made a historic decision. It shut off an oil pipeline worth $13 billion that had been supplying oil and gas to the United States. Washington didn't even have time to react. The energy flow that had been fueling the world's largest economy for years was stopped. This is not just a diplomatic gesture. It is a strategic shift that could radically change the global energy balance. Ottawa's decision instantly caused an energy shock in the U.S. Prices for gasoline, oil, and electricity soared to record levels. Millions of Americans faced serious disruptions in daily life, from morning commutes to flights and home heating. Airlines report a rapid increase in fuel costs. Transport and manufacturing companies are revising budgets, and major industries are on the verge of a crisis. For years, Canada warned that if the U.S. continued to impose unilateral trade tariffs, a response would inevitably follow. However, Washington preferred to ignore the signals. As a result, Ottawa not only stopped oil and gas supplies, but also signed multi-billion-dollar contracts for long-term deliveries with China and India, the largest energy markets of today. This is not revenge, but a well-thought-out economic strategy. Diversify exports, reduce dependence on the U.S., and enter new markets. The world is rapidly restructuring. Europe and Asia are already integrating into new energy flow routes. The European Union, seeking to rid itself of dependence on Russia, has rapidly activated energy cooperation with Canada. Asia, with its insatiable demand, is also emerging as a key client for Canadian energy. Canada's export infrastructure, ports, pipelines, railways, is beginning to pivot away from the U.S. toward Europe and the Pacific region. For the U.S., this is not just an economic blow. It is the loss of a strategic advantage. States like New York, California, and Michigan are facing the threat of rolling blackouts. Hydroelectric power, previously supplied from Canada, became inaccessible. Utility prices have multiplied. Regions are implementing consumption restrictions during peak hours. Production giants in the automotive, metallurgical, and food industries have begun to cut back on production. Tens of thousands of jobs are at risk. Americans are already feeling the onset of an energy winter. Prices for gasoline, airline tickets, heating, and food are hitting records. Family budgets are bursting at the seams. The electrical power and fuel infrastructure built on dependency from Canada have been paralyzed. Washington is forced to acknowledge the country is facing the deepest economic shock in decades. Amid this panic, another crucial news item has almost been lost. The U.S. and Canada have suspended a $19 billion deal. It concerns the purchase of 88 F-35 fighters. Suddenly, Ottawa began to reevaluate the contract, symbolizing not only doubts about the effectiveness of American arms, but also a geopolitical shift. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney openly stated, "Canada will not allow pressure from the U.S., even if it costs defense relations." Moreover, Canada is considering an alternative, the Swedish Saab Gripen fighters. They are cheaper, easier to maintain, and capable of operating in Arctic conditions. But more importantly, this represents a symbolic break. Canada is no longer the junior partner to the U.S. in defense matters. Meanwhile, the European Union is launching a major defense program, Rearm Europe, with an €800 billion budget. The goal is to remove restrictions on defense budgets, boost weapons production, and reduce dependence on the U.S. By 2030, EU military spending could reach €1 trillion. This signals a shift. The center of power is moving to Europe, and Washington's role is gradually diminishing. Against this backdrop, Donald Trump continues to exacerbate the situation. His press conference at the White House raised even more questions, from threats to withdraw from NATO to refusing to protect allies if they do not pay enough. Accusations were also made against Canada, including a threat to impose 100% tariffs on its auto industry if it does not stop migration across the northern border. Canada's response was immediate. No economic pressure will force us to relinquish our sovereignty. Furthermore, Ottawa began to review all purchases of American military systems. Portugal, another NATO member, has already refused to purchase F-35s, citing destabilizing U.S. foreign policy. Meanwhile, the Canadian defense sector is rapidly developing. Over 60% of revenues in this industry come from exports. Companies such as General Dynamics, CAE, and Magellan Aerospace are advancing their technologies and expanding contracts with Europe and Asia. Sanctions, tariffs, and verbal skirmishes have dealt a severe blow to the American economy. The Dow Jones plummeted by 850 points, and the Nasdaq fell by 3.1%. Investors are fleeing stocks, and inflation is rising. According to the Federal Reserve, the probability of a recession in 2025 has reached 65%. Even Fox News, the steadfast mouthpiece of the Republicans, is now criticizing Trump's economic policy. Reporters explicitly state, tariffs are paid not by foreign companies, but by American consumers and businesses. Import prices have risen by 17%, and inflation in key sectors by 5.2%. Meanwhile, Canada acts coolly. Retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods, including food, clothing, and household appliances, have been introduced. The second stage is even tougher, $125 billion under sanctions, including cars, steel, aluminum, and agricultural products. These are strikes at the most vulnerable spots of the U.S. The auto industry is particularly suffering. The production of electric vehicles, dependent on Canadian rare earth metals, is under threat. Canada is already considering new partnerships with Europe, China, and South Korea. The Canadian public supports the government. More than 70% of citizens approve of the tough response to U.S. actions. The country's politicians increasingly talk about closer ties with the EU and Asia. The North American economic landscape is rapidly changing. The U.S. is losing its closest and strategically important trading partner. Washington faces a choice: continue the confrontation and lose leadership, or back down and revise its policy. However, as recent events show, the world no longer waits for America's decision. The world is learning to live without it.